Rivals of Aether 2. Oh boy. What can I say about this game that warrants an intro that leaves my thoughts up in the air? This was one of the biggest falls from grace that I've seen. This may not be the most hyped indie game out there, but it was definitely high up the list. Fast forward over half a year post-launch, and the player base plummeted. It shows little to no sign of recovery, it constantly hovers around mixed Steam reviews, and in general, a lot of people just don't seem happy with it, including me. I was excited for this game because of how much fun I have with Rivals 1, and even though I went in knowing full well that it wouldn't have mod support out the gate, I was still ready to see how much this game would evolve from the last. But something about it just wasn't right. It's not fun. I mean, I'll state right now that I don't hate everything about this game, but anything good about it is absolutely drowned out by its cons. Rivals 2 is quite simply a bad game. And as much as I would like to give it credit for what it does right, this video will be focused on its biggest issues, as it paints a pretty clear picture of what happened and why people are unhappy. I mean, yeah, the menus suck and the game is noticeably more sluggish compared to Rivals 1, but those issues aren't as fundamental as the others. Based on my own experience and what other people have said, I believe there are 4 major problems with Rivals 2. Lack of content, live service elements, the game design itself, and finally, the active player base. Firstly, lack of content. Rivals 2 has almost nothing of substance to do. In terms of game modes, you get Versus, Online, Arcade, 3 pitiful extra modes, one of which is just copied from the arcade mode, and that's it. This game suffers from what I can best describe as the fighting game content curse. Not coining the term, by the way, that's just what I describe it as. In other words, it's a common thread I noticed among fighting games where the actual playable content available is more or less equivalent to an arcade release. In other words, arcade mode and multiplayer. Putting it that way, I do understand why this happens as much as it does. Fighting games did thrive in the arcades, but that doesn't make this any less of a problem. Surprisingly, fighting CPUs over and over again with little to no variation can get kind of boring very quickly. So what do you do if you're trying to enjoy the game without playing online games? Nothing. For Rivals 2, that's a much bigger issue than you would expect. This drought of substance, alongside one of the other issues I'll get into, genuinely makes me wonder why this wasn't released as a free-to-play. This was priced at a cool $40 Canadian, and for that price you get a bare minimum amount of modes, less characters and stages than the current version of Rivals 1, and the exact same structure that you would expect from a free-to-play game. This wouldn't be a huge issue if you didn't have to pay for the game, but because that's not the case, I think it's safe to say that Rivals 2, despite not being marketed as such, is an early access release. But by far the worst part about the lack of content is that it launched with no in-game tutorials. That's right, the game that practically demands you play online against other players to have any semblance of fun was so lazy about its tutorialization that it got sent to Steam forums to learn the game. This introduces many problems that relate to how the gameplay was designed, but like I said, the game design is its own issue, so just put a pin in that for now. There's not much else to talk about in regard to this particular issue. I think at this point it should be obvious why this is a problem and why this hurts the game. I don't think anyone reasonable went into this expecting Street Fighter 6 levels of single-player content, but even still, there could have been something. And unless I didn't look into it enough, I'm pretty sure that up until its release, we never got a clear picture of how much single-player content would be available on launch until basically the 11th hour. If the game wanted to be online-centric, then that's perfectly fine, but it goes without saying that people who pay to play a game expect more than what we got. That, combined with the fact the most significant additions on the roadmap are things that already exist in Rivals 1, makes me wonder how this game can justify itself as a sequel to that game when it objectively has more content out the gate. No, implementing those features into Rivals 2 won't be a simple copy-paste job, and sequels don't simply have to be a last game but more, but what exactly does this game bring to the table that warrants that big number in its title? Well... Second issue, live service elements. This is the other reason why I wonder why this game isn't a free-to-play, because... I mean, look at it, it's structured almost identically to one. You got a battle pass, a whole storefront with microtransactions, skins and other cosmetics out the wazoo. If you told me this game wasn't meant to be a free-to-play live service game, I wouldn't believe you. Granted, I don't take any inherent issue with games like that, but mostly because of the free-to-play part, which this game isn't. But it gets worse. Look at this skin. Cool, right? How much does it cost? Well, since this is a purple level skin, I swear those classifications are never not arbitrary. Anyway, it costs 1,500 Ether bucks if it isn't in the main shop rotation. And if you go to the purchasing options, you'll see that the cheapest option necessary for that is 3,000 bucks for nearly the same price as the actual game. Yeah, this has been a controversial point since the game's launch, and it is absolutely warranted. Now, I'd like to counter a potential defense for this because I did neglect to mention this fact. This doesn't matter because you could obtain everything for free just by playing the game. I'm afraid that defense is only half right. Indeed, you can obtain any cosmetic for free, and it is appreciated. Past battle passes are always available, and it's good that you can obtain anything just through playing the game. But that doesn't mean the microtransactions don't matter. You see, it is true that you can get anything for free. That doesn't mean you will. The first reason for this would be the scarcity of Aether bucks. You get them from battle passes, character level ups, and that's it. The second reason is the rotating shop, because behind paying real money, this is by far the second easiest way to obtain a new skin. Anything in the shop's catalog is purchased with Aether coins, and much like the first game, you earn those through just playing matches. Though I guess that statement should be in quotations because the actual payout you get compared to the prices is absolutely pitiful. Oh, and of course, you can exchange bucks for coins, just in case you want to spend more money. What this means is that if you want to get anything for free, then you grind matches for hours upon hours and just hope you get lucky with the shop rotation. Otherwise, you cough up money. This is absolute dog shit. Between this monetization practice and paying for DLC characters, I take the latter. Issue the third. The game design itself. Now that may sound like a weird thing to say, but the gist of it is this. I take major issue with the design and direction for the gameplay of Rivals 2. Mainly because it was clearly trying to be more like a Smash game than Rivals 1 was. It should be worth noting out the gate that I am really bad at platform fighters. I have no reason to hide that fact, it's just how it is. I've tried to improve on a number of occasions and it just never worked out. But skill level aside, I still aim to give an objective critique of its design. For example, this game introduces ledge, get-up, and pummel specials. Now, here's a simple question. What do these actually add to the game? You already have normal versions of all of these. On a character-specific level, all it seems to do is give them more ways to use their already present gimmicks, not that the characters were lacking in that. And even then, it doesn't apply 100% of the time. On a universal level though, well, you do get this weird mechanic where if you're grabbed, you can guess what pummel the opponent uses to instantly break out of the grab. What's the point of this mechanic? I have no fucking clue. In fact, you'd be forgiven for not knowing that it was ever a thing, like me. Shockingly, obscure mechanics like that are really hard to learn about when the game isn't teaching you. The in-game tutorial that covers this was actually a recent addition. To put it simply, I don't believe these new mechanics in Rivals 2 do anything to meaningfully change, let alone improve the gameplay. It just feels like new additions for the sake of new additions. At least those ones do. The others feel like they're in the game just so it can be more like Smash, which, surprisingly enough, isn't an inherent benefit. The devs didn't consider this, however, and it shows in one particular mechanic. Possibly the most controversial part of the entire game. And that's saying something. Let's talk about this game's overemphasis on defense. In case anyone forgot what playing Rivals 1 was like, which, fair enough, the game is kinda dead, you had one major defensive option, and that was the parry. It is a very strong tool, don't get me wrong, but because of how it works, you won't be able to make use of it without having a grasp on each character's attacks and being able to actually time the parry, which is a long-winded way of saying that it has a high skill floor and it rewards you for passing it. Parrying returns in Rivals 2 and is untouched for the most part, but despite that, it's basically useless compared to shielding and other options. Shielding comparatively has much lower risk, a much lower skill floor, but still has a significant reward. Of course, that obviously isn't the worst of these mechanics. The worst of it is definitely floor hugging. This mechanic in simple terms is when you're hit on the ground and you simply hold down to drastically change your trajectory and reduce hit stun. It's basically a different version of DI, a mechanic that I'm honestly already pretty iffy about, only dialed up to 11. I wasn't being rhetorical when I said it feels like a lot of new additions were put in here for no other reason than they exist in the Smash games. Floor hugging is a prime example of that. It is a completely asinine mechanic that only serves to make the game worse, but it's in here anyway because some of the Smash games have something similar, regardless if it was actually an intended mechanic or not. But why is it so bad, I hear you asking? Well, I already stated the reason. My reservations towards standard DI still apply to floor hugging, but the hit stun reduction alone is what makes it so bad. One of the consequences and biggest benefit of floor hugging's hit stun reduction is that if you're hit by certain moves, i.e. non-throw attacks with low launch power, and you successfully floor hug, it's possible for your opponent to be punishable on hit. That term is probably meaningless to most of you, but it is one of the biggest blights in early bad fighting game design. In layman's terms, it's like getting into a fight with someone, kicking him in the groin, only for him to then stab you with a knife as if you never hurt him. Basically, if landing an attack makes you punishable on hit, then that attack may as well be useless. Obviously, you don't want to design a moveset where any one move hitting your opponent causes them to win that interaction, yet here we have a deliberate mechanic that makes this possible in multiple scenarios. Like I said, I struggle to rationalize the choice to implement this for any reason other than to make it more like a Smash game, but I'll take at least 3 milliseconds to humor the most notable defense for this mechanic. The game needs it because it's possible to easily execute infinites and 0-to-death combos. Yeah, I'm not convinced. Lots of fighting games have situational instant death combos, but still prevent them through other means like damage or hit stun scaling. They don't let you arbitrarily use a costless combo breaker. But more to the point, regardless of whether it's necessary, it's not. I would still argue it's bad design. I brought up the other defensive mechanics and the risk reward for a reason. Of course, shielding makes parries near obsolete because there's little need to time your attacks, hence lower skill floor. You get a free attack most of the time, hence high reward, and the shield will almost never break, hence very low risk. Now compare that to the shit we just discussed about floor hugging. The reward is a free attack again, but now the risk in question is literally being hit. And last time I checked, holding down when you get attacked doesn't take much skill. As a matter of fact, they actually made floor hugging easier in a recent update. And if shielding alone makes parries inconsequential, then shields combined with floor hugging makes parries pointless outside of getting a free strong attack. Think about that as a statement. Rivals 2 tried so hard to be more like Smash that parrying, arguably the defining universal mechanic of Rivals 1, is rendered tremendously situational at best. Maybe this is why I'm borderline incapable of performing well in online matches. I'm still assuming I'm playing Rivals 1 while everyone else is falling back on their experience of playing Melee tournaments for the past 10,000 years. Oh yeah, I said that was its own issue. Well, issue 4, the active player base. You know how some people say they don't get into fighting games because of a perceived notion that the online space is infested with sweats who only care about decimating you even though you're obviously bad? Rivals 2 is that scenario, but actually real. Picture this, you're a casual platform fighter player. You just like messing around in Smash Bros. Or Rivals 1. You understand enough about the games to clear the story modes or beat the harder CPUs, but you know you're not the best in any way. Now you picked up Rivals 2, got a feel for the game, you think you're ready to tackle online, so you hop into a ranked match and get absolutely destroyed. Aside from being an accurate account of my own experience with the launch of the game, I think it's safe to say that it's not a coincidence, which is precisely the reason I reserved this problem for last. Because with everything I just discussed in mind, it should be clear not only why this happened, but why this is especially detrimental to Rivals 2. After all, players who optimize their gameplay to hell and back exist for every game, but that usually isn't a bad thing, so why would it be a problem here? Well, to start off, the storefront is indicative of the intent for Rivals 2 to be an online-centric game. After all, games that have similar models survive and thrive off a healthy, active player base. Earning new cosmetic items will most certainly be the main driving force for players and is what will keep the game supported. Sure, they already bought the base game and the cosmetics can, at least in theory, be obtained with no extra money, but the storefront will be the game's main source of revenue. Now, if someone were to go the free route, they would need to play a lot. Like, a lot. This is where the lack of content rears its ugly head, because if you want to get those items solo, you have to be content with the pitiful amount of modes that, for the most part, are fundamentally the same thing. For most people, if they want to have any semblance of consistent fun with the game, the kind of fun that's necessary for them to go through the excruciating grind needed for a new skin, most of the time, they're gonna have to play online. And that's where the gameplay comes in and kicks you while you're already down. Because with design that's much closer to the Smash games than Rivals 1, high-level players of those games, especially Melee, are able to comfortably adjust to the gameplay with virtually no issue and dominate the online space while newbies are still suffering from the lack or even complete absence of tutorials. Rivals 2 is a game that, intentionally or not, is anti-casual by design. There's too much to learn, not enough to do, and virtually no resources to actually improve your gameplay. I genuinely don't understand why platform fighters that try to be competitive oriented still design themselves after Smash when there's such a massive disconnect between how the game is played at low and high levels. Obviously, when it comes to the online experience with Rivals 2, I am mostly speaking from my own experience when I say this, but just attempting to fight someone who has a wealth of experience to fall back on top of knowledge that you do not inherently get through playing the game, is not fun. It's easy to hear a criticism like that and say that I need to get good and then it'll be fun, and believe me, I want to. I genuinely want to. Hell, I was hardly into fighting games for most of my life, and I only recently started to get into them. Yet despite my limited experience with them, I think I can safely say that fighting games as a genre are the most fun to get better at. I may still be inexperienced, but the amount of time I could waste in training modes pulling off the most impractical and unoptimal combos is way more than you would think, because it's just fun to do so. Every time I hop into training mode in Rivals 2, I start to feel like I understand less about how the game works, and frankly, that ties into issues I have with the entire platform fighters subgenre. A topic worthy of its own video, so I'd rather go into depth with it in said video and not spend too much time with it here. The TLDR of this is that Rivals 2, despite being structured like games that rely on their active player base, ended up repelling massive portions of its potential players because of its inherent appeal to the hardcore audience. And the game had, and to an extent still does, have virtually no resources to learn the gameplay despite mechanical knowledge and execution being essential to even stand a chance against people who are familiar with these games. As a result, the steps in question needed to reach the point where you can have a fighting chance are equivalent to a climbing wall with no holds, and the chance that a casual such as yourself can actually find players at your skill level may as well be zero when they probably quit the game for the same reasons you did. And while you could say that this is the fault of the game's community itself because they are the ones you have to fight, I would still point the finger at the game and its design because it practically begged for that environment to form. So, these are the 4 major reasons that I believe are the cause of the downfall of Rivals 2. Now, I kind of just want to rant about the game's future because it looks pretty bleak. As stated earlier, the most significant additions given in the pre-launch roadmap are things that already exist in the first game. Beyond that, we'll obviously be getting a consistent addition of characters and stages, but I don't expect any of these updates to actually redeem it. Even if we fast forward a few years to the point where it has equivalent or even more content compared to Rivals 1, it will likely be too little too late. Besides, even with that, that's only one problem solved. You still have the predatory microtransactions, you still have the poorly designed gameplay, and you still have an online scene that's virtually impossible to approach. By all means, add 100 new characters to the roster. It won't make a difference, and Rivals 1 will still be the better game. But even saying that still begs one big question about its future. What about the addition of mod support? When it was added to Rivals 1, it almost single-handedly turned the game from a small, obscure project to the definitive platform fighter mod engine. The modding scene was something to behold, with community members making anything from well-designed characters, stages with wild gimmicks, or anything that just completely breaks the rules of the game. Or straight up crashes it. This was the biggest appeal of Rivals 1, and when it gets added to Rivals 2, I don't think it'll make a difference. Gaming communities are incredibly dedicated to even the most random and unheard of games, but support on this level is the kind of thing that has to be earned. You know a great way to prevent that support? Alienate a sizable portion of your audience through its design and direction. I doubt the folks behind Rivals 2 are oblivious to the less than favorable reception, so my biggest fear/expectation for mod support is that they'll try to use it as a crutch to win back players, in a desperate attempt to recapture the old modding scene in Rivals 1. But who the hell is gonna make or play mods for a game they're not having fun with? This game almost feels directionless with where it's going. It's like they released the game and went, I guess we bring back stuff from the last game and add more skins now. Though I suppose that implies they had a direction during development. And when you consider there was a Kickstarter midway through that period and the state the game was in on launch, I find that hard to believe. The fact that this is a sequel to a game like Rivals of Aether is nothing short of baffling. It feels like a completely different team took charge of the game, and now that I think about it, that probably was the case. I've come to realize that Rivals of Aether is no longer a small-scale passion project made by one guy with a dream that chanced upon one of the best modding communities out there. It's an entire small franchise with spin-offs out the wazoo and infinitely more money and resources to produce a sequel that was, and still is, blatantly inferior to what started it. Whatever vision this brand new studio has for the game just isn't working, and it's hard to be optimistic about its future. They're planning to add a story mode, but knowing how they approach the rest of the game, I have no reason to expect anything more than a half-assed knockoff of Subspace Emissary. I didn't mean for this video to end on such a depressing note, but it reflects how I feel about the game, so I suppose it fits. And yes, that really is all I have to say about Rivals 2. Sorry to everyone who expected more multi-hour reviews on this channel, but my feelings toward this game are not that strong, especially when I start viewing Rivals of Aether as a franchise instead of a single game. Moreover, the problems with Rivals 2 may be huge, and they may be blatant, but they're not deep. It doesn't take a genius to understand what its problems are or why they are problems. Can this game actually be fixed in its future? I mean, yeah. provided they actually know what needs to be fixed. But that probably means the devs have to listen to community feedback, and something tells me they're, struggling with that. Not that it matters to me. I lost my investment in this game within its first week. I only went back to it because I wanted to make this video. In summary, Rivals of Aether 2 in many ways almost feels like the AAA game of indie games. A game with much more budget and resources than the previous entry that proceeded to waste it on a vastly inferior product than what came before, a blatantly unfinished 1.0 version, and the exact same monetization practices that plague larger games. Whatever identity the first game had is completely lost in its sequel, thanks in large part to its clear desire to be the next Smash Melee. As a result, it failed at being a Rivals of Aether game. Of course, it did succeed at being a Smash-like game, of course only with less characters, less stages, and less game modes on top of every other issue I went over. When the first better game is right there and selling for the same price, I cannot in good conscience recommend this to someone who isn't already a competitive level Smash player, or a furry. The extent to which that Venn diagram overlaps is up to your interpretation. So immediately moving on from that statement, I give Rivals of Aether 2 a brutally honest 3 out of 10. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm just never going to touch this game again. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you had fun. Sorry this video took so long for what it ended up being, but old habits die hard, and man, that first script really needed to be scrapped. I'm much happier with this one. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean I'll suddenly stick to a consistent upload schedule, because I have no intention of making this a full-time thing. A hobby at most. I don't even intend to make money off of these videos, especially if it's coming from YouTube. On the bright side, it means I won't have to do any self-censoring to avoid demonetization, but it also means that I'm forced to do this during my spare time. As far as future videos are concerned, I still want to try my hand at making a mod for Rivals 1, but I'm not entirely sure how I would make a video around that subject, so it's probably going on the back burner. For now, at least, I'll continue with reviews for whatever game I want to talk about, and man, there are some games I want to talk about right now. No further teasers beyond that. Besides, I should probably get to work on that as soon as possible. So, that's it for now. See you next time.